Right. All right, guys, we are recording. First thing I want to say is that next week we are off because of Purim. So, okay, even though it's Shushan Purim, but whatever. Okay, so I sent a bunch of reference sheets, and I hope I didn't drive you all crazy with that. But I kind of wanted to just last week we kind of set Mishnah Torah into the Rambam's intellectual biography, right? So Rambam basically we looked at his biography in terms of what happened in his life and the fact that he calls himself Hasfaradi, which we're going to see today, but spends most of his life, the beginning of his life, fleeing Spain, even though he always associates himself with that. We'll come back to that. And yet, even with the tumultuous aspects of things that happened in his life, both in terms of fleeing the place where his family had lived for generations and making a new home, both in Morocco and then in Egypt. And between that, he also spent time in Eretz Yisrael. Imagine all of that going on. And within that, he was still able to not only produce great works in logic and philosophy, but also an entire commentary on the Mishnah, and then an entire halakhic code that we're focusing on in this class. And then the most famous philosophical work in all of Judaism. It was written 1,000 years ago, and it is still considered to be the ultimate work in Jewish philosophy. And of course, we talked about earlier, Elisheva and I were talking about the fact that his brother and his main supporter, both psychologically, emotionally, and financially, was killed. And so, just putting him into that kind of intellectual context, we talk about all the time, the fact that he emerged from the golden age of Spain, and he emerged as a major, thinker in terms of being an Arabic speaker and being completely immersed in the Greek philosophy and science of his time that had reemerged during the Islamic period. And so he's clearly a child of that, a product of that. That's his intellectual background. But I always wanted to make sure that we understand where he's coming from in terms of his personal background as well. And the fact that he's able to, think about the things that we manage, which is quite a lot, and think about what he was managing in terms of that and the impact that he had. The other thing I want to say, just in terms of leaving last week's class, I want us to bear in mind, and I'm going to point this out as we move forward, the hot wire issues for Rambam are not the same as our hot wire issues. Okay, so philosophically speaking, what do I mean by that? Like, what were the hot issues in Rambam's time? And I think the best way for us to relate to that is to think about the kinds of things that Rabbi Sachs made sure that he was recording certain ideas about morality and about unity and about diaspora and Israel and all of these types of things. Those, if you just look at what the kinds of things Rabbi Sachs spoke about, then you get a sense of what are the hot wire issues for Jews today, and what was he trying to bridge. They're not the same as the hot wire issues for Rambam, and so sometimes you'll read things in Rambam and you'll be like, well, okay, well, who cares? Well, because he's writing about the things that were really, really important to him in order to kind of integrate a Jewish perspective and a general philosophical perspective. And whether those two things could be bridged, those were the things that really mattered to him. So, of course, something that's going on in the 12th century is not necessarily the kind of thing that is something that's really going to keep us up at night, the way that it would for someone at that time. I don't know what keeps you up at night. I know there's a lot of things that keep us up at night, and he went through those things as well. He didn't have to worry about ballistic missiles, but he was worrying about his own things, his own day-to-day as well. So today I just wanted to take a moment to talk about, not a moment, really, I want us to be all on the same page in terms of, we talked about his personal history. We'll continue to talk about his intellectual history because that's really what's interesting. But I want to place the code, the Mishnah Torah, in some sort of historical context. Okay, so I sent you some things. I don't know if you had a chance to print them out, and it's the kind of thing, if I were nice, I would have printed out for you and laminated it, but I only thought of doing it yesterday. So that got rid of that idea. But and these are things that are really just reference for you so you can understand where we're coming from. Okay. So the first thing I have is putting the shas. So putting Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. We call it shas, okay? Shin Samech stands for Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. The 6 orders or the 6 volumes of the Mishnah. Okay, what is the Mishnah? The Mishnah is the record of early rabbinical rulings. Okay, mainly it's in the world of halakha, but as we've learned in this class before, if you ever went to the Meet the Sages class, we learned that even some Mishnayot, even some of these early rabbinical writings have some stories in them too, what we call agadot, which sometimes you hear are called midrashim. Why don't I call them midrashim? Because midrashim coexisted with Mishnah and Gemara. Okay, but it's all early rabbinical writings. If I say midrash, that should be a little code in your mind to know that it's not about halakha. It's not about law. It's a story. If I say agadata, that also is a little bell in your mind to say, it's a story. Okay, which is fun. Those are the things that we love. But if someone wants to learn halakha, if they want to learn the law, they're not using those stories so much. Although we will see that Rambam, that's the cool thing about Rambam, he integrates a lot of those stories for specific purposes. But if we're talking about halakha, we have midrashim, we have agadot, we have stories on one hand, and we have mishnayot on the other hand. Okay, so if you look at the sheet that I sent to you, you see that the Mishnah was redacted in around the year 200. Okay, what do I mean by it was redacted? So writing was a technology that's existed for a long time. Okay, Jews are often called people of the book, Am HaSefer, right? Actually, we never called ourselves people of the book. That was a koteret, that was a title that was given to us by the Muslims, actually, in the Quran. They call us Aktub, okay? They call us the people of the book. We were not a people of the book. We had our Torah, but most of our Judaism, most of our theology was passed down how? Orally. Exactly. And there was always, I think about it today in terms of our tension with AI. Right? AI is the new technology, and there's obviously global resistance, but also a lot of infatuation with it. And I wonder, what would ancient Jews, what would they have to say about AI, knowing that we've always had a resistance to certain technologies? There was always a resistance to writing things down and recording them in that way, and shifting from oral tradition to written tradition. What else were we resistant about? Publishing. Okay, so the Gutenberg Bible was published in the 15th century, right? Someone know 14 something? It was published. So the Gutenberg Bible was printed for the first time. With a printing press was put into use. It was a mechanical way of taking what was written and printing it out. We were resistant to it. We learned in the Tefillah class that we didn't have a Siddur. We didn't have a Siddur. The one book that you can find in almost every Jewish home, we didn't have one until the 8th century. Okay? We didn't. Why? Adele asked a very good question. Why? Why aren't we the writers? Why don't we like to write things down? Or ancient Jews, why did we, or medieval Jews, why were we so resistant to writing things down? What's the problem with writing things down?
So it limits them.
It limits them. It makes them permanent. Exactly. It does not allow for nimbleness and flexibility.
It's an oral tradition.
It's an oral tradition, right? But it's an oral tradition because we drew it that way, right? It didn't have to be an oral tradition. It just became who we were.
But it's also a tradition, how we pray and how we prayed before we all had Siddurim.
Right. Exactly. It allows for a lot more flexibility. Yeah. Okay. At a certain point, so anybody who's taking this class and the Tefillah class, we're going to be in parallel tracks in many respects because it keeps happening, the tension about solidifying things. We want to keep things fluid. We want to keep things nimble. And the moment that we feel like we're losing it, someone feels like they have to write it down. At the moment they write it down, we all say, oh, we can't stand the Siddur, we can't stand Shul, because we're Jews. We want to be, we want to be in the moment. We want to be experiential, and we want to be able to keep things alive. But at the end of the day, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who lived around the year 200, he lived up in Sipori. We think that beautiful mosaic home was actually Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's. He was quite wealthy, even though he was living in the aftermath of the Bar Kokhba revolt and total destruction here in Israel. I think he had some side hustles or something, because he managed to. He was known as a wealthy man, and he decided the writing was on the wall. He saw what was happening. The Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael was decimated. It was absolutely decimated. It was going to be centuries until the Jewish community really built up again in Jerusalem. And so he decided to write down the Mishnah, and that was a huge controversial move. But let me just give you an idea of what I mean by writing down the Mishnah. Okay, so I have here. Just imagine, okay? Imagine I just try to imagine he's got, let's say, 200 students, and they all are holding on to these manuscripts that people had been memorizing for centuries and centuries, but over time had started to write things down. It wasn't like people didn't have manuscripts. People had their own personal manuscripts, but they were never kind of disseminated in a massive way. And so here he is. Let's say he's deciding to look at the laws of brachot, okay? He decides he wants to look at the laws of prayer and blessings. And so he's got, hundreds of manuscripts of, and people telling him, well, Rabbi Akiva, who died before Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Akiva said this, and this person said this, and he's trying to just contemplate all of these different ideas and record them. And so he has to come up with a way of organizing the whole thing. Now, the organizational method already existed. We know that the rabbis, after the destruction of the temple in 70, so around the year 100, were already coming up with ways of organizing halakha, but Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was the first one to actually organize it and write it down, and he came up with a really interesting method. He came up with 6 major volumes, and they're in here. You don't have to look at it that carefully, but we have Zra'im, which deals with agriculture. When I say the main themes, of course, all of you know that the Mishnah is more organized than the Gemara, but it's discursive, okay? So we have Zra'im that deals with agricultural laws, Moed that deals with all the fun stuff, like the calendar and Shabbat. Nashim, women, deals with all of the intricate things having to do with marriage, divorce, and family life. Nezikin is also really fun for a lot of people. It's the laws that we still use today, like how to deal with your neighbors. It's all there in that Seder, okay? What do you do if your neighbor's tree is growing into your yard and dropping oranges into your pool? You can find it in Nezikin, Kochim, which deals with the temple service, and Tarot, which deals with ritual purity. Over here in the middle, I've written down the tractates. These are the smaller volumes. In each of the big volumes, we have sub-volumes. If it's bolded, that means there's a Gemara for it. Okay, that means that the later rabbis, after Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, kept talking about these Mishnayot, and they also got written down. It's like a commentary, but it's less like a commentary and more like they continued the conversation. Okay, so the Mishnah was written down, and right away people are like, well, what did he mean by that? And what did he mean by that? And let's argue about that, and let's talk about it. And that's what the Gemara is. It's the continuation of that discussion, of that conversation. Now, there are 2 major, let me finish this and then we'll come back. There are 2 major, yes?
We just need the sheets.
I don't print them out. They're in the group, and you should be in the group. But if not, it's okay. None of this, follow me, and then it's going to be recorded. and then you'll be able to look at the sheets afterwards. Don't stress too much about the sheets. It won't, there's nothing genius here. Okay. So there are two sets of Gemaras. Okay. There's one that's called the Jerusalem Talmud.
In the Babylon.
And there's the other one's called the Babylonian Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud it was finally redacted and edited around 350 to 400. The Babylonian Talmud went for another 150 years. Why is the Babylonian Talmud so much later? Why does it go on so much later than the Jerusalem Talmud? Basically, because again, the rabbis who were left in Jerusalem saw, like Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they saw the writing on the wall. And they said, if we don't start writing this down, if we don't start editing this, we're going to lose it. And what was happening with the Babylonian Jews? They were sitting pretty. They were having a good life. Okay. Diaspora life in Babylon was not bad. The ruling Persians were basically fine. No, sorry, we're after the Persians. It was okay, whatever. Now we're at the limit of my knowledge of what was going on in Iraq and Baghdad. Let's say until the Muslims took over, and even after the Muslims took over, they were doing just fine in Baghdad and in those areas. And they went with the vicissitudes of the government, and they were allowed to have their Jewish practice, and they were allowed to have their own courts. And so you see that the Babylonian Talmud, if you look on a shelf, you rarely will find the Jerusalem Talmud, because the Babylonian Talmud is because it went on for so much longer, it is the basis for everything that we do today. Halakhically comes from the Babylonian Talmud. A very, very small percentage comes from the Jerusalem Talmud. And that's why if you would look on the shelf in a shul, you will find a shas. That's what we call a full set of Gemara. And if I say there's a shas on the shelf, I really mean there's a Babylonian Talmud on the shelf, because you had years and years, 150 years longer for these rabbis to keep talking about the Mishnah. Okay. Now also, but if I had them side by side, the Babylonian Talmud would take up a whole shelf and the Jerusalem Talmud would be much shorter. It was much shorter. Why was it much shorter? Because they didn't have a lot of time. It was a community that was dying out in Eretz Yisrael at that point. So they didn't have they didn't have the comfort and the free time to keep arguing about things as much as they do in the Babylonian Talmud. Let me just try to give you a visual of what I'm talking about. And it's hard, it's hard to totally visualize it. The reason it's hard to totally visualize it is because I want to show you let's for 1 second, let's look at this sheet again. Sorry, if you don't have the sheet, I hate to rub salt on the wound, but if you look in this middle section, anything that's bolded means there's a Gemara on it, mostly a Babylonian Gemara. Okay, so for instance, there is a tractate of Mishnah. If you look on the sheet, there's a tractate of Mishnah called Brachot. It's bolded, which means the reason why it's bolded is because there's a Gemara on it. All right, that's one of the most famous tractates, most famous Masechtot in Gemara, is Brachot. If you keep looking at Zra'im, of Seder Zra'im, you have Peah, Demai, Kafayim, Shvi'i, Trumot, Masrot, Maser Sheni, Chala, Orya, Bikurim, and we have no Gemara on any of those Mishnayot. Why don't we have Gemara on those Mishnayot?
But not in Israel, maybe?
Because it's not in Israel, right? But also, we're talking about way after the destruction of the temple, when a lot of this became less relevant. So because it became not all of it, but because it became less relevant, especially things having to do with korbanot, because it became less relevant, people were talking about it less, and things got lost. Things also got lost. So if you, like Elizabeth said, if you're talking about Eretz Yisrael, well, all of those things like Peah and Demai and all of those things, they have to do with Maser, they have to do with agriculture, and not with agriculture outside of Eretz Yisrael. So if most of the Jewish world is moving outside of Eretz Yisrael, a lot of this is becoming irrelevant. And also we lose it because of the vicissitudes of time. So what do we have a lot of tractates on? Well, we have a lot of existing Gemaras on the Zikin. The Zikin is damages. Doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter what century you live in, you're always going to have to deal with your neighbor. It's always going to be the case. So that's why you have loads and loads and loads of Gemara on damages. So let me just give you an example. Let me just give you an example. This is Mishnah, okay? Now, it's really hard to find just a plain Mishnah. This is Mishnah without Gemara, but of course, it has some commentary on the bottom. So it's hard to find just straight on book that just has Mishnah. But if we just forget the fact that this is taking up a lot of space, I just want to be able to show you it without all of the commentary, but I can't. This is a whole volume of Mishnah. Okay, this is Masechet Brachot. This is the tractate of Brachot. It's one of the most well-read and most well-known tractates of Mishnah. Okay, now remember, it's got commentary on the bottom. If I just took the Mishnah and I just showed that to you, it would probably be half the size. It would probably be just this long. Okay, it would be something you could learn in a couple of days. All right, if you had your nice English translation, you could get through it very quickly. It's not that long, right? Then it gets written down. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi writes down all of the laws that he considers important, all of the rabbinical rulings about prayer and blessings and times and all of that. He writes it down and still ends up just with this, okay? The rabbis get a hold of it, and now you've got the Gemara. Now, this is the Gemara of Mishnah, and it's not big letters, and you've got a lot. That's already the back of it.
Why, kind of a quick, simple question. Why did they feel they needed to do a Gemara? Why did they feel like they needed to do it again?
They didn't do it again. They had to keep the discussion going, because once it was written down, they're like, well, what does that mean? And what does that mean? And what does that mean? And I disagree with you. And Adele says it means this, and David says it means that. Well, who's right? And that's part of the beauty in the halakhic discussion.
Are they doing it now?
They're
also?
continuing. Yes, they're continuing to do it now. So that just is a nice visualization of what happens is someone has a great idea. Let's organize everything into just 6 major volumes. Those major volumes turn into sub volumes. And then the rabbis get a hold of it and they're like, we want to continue the discussion because this is relevant. This shows that it's relevant. If it's bold, it means it was relevant and they wanted to continue the discussion. Okay, so now we know everything that happened through the 6th century. Okay, this gets edited. The Mishnah gets edited. Sorry, I've got so many books here. The Mishnah, that small amount, gets edited in the 2nd century. This gets edited in the 6th century. Okay, so many centuries later, this gets edited. It doesn't mean it's writings from the 6th century. It means that someone said, we got to collect all of this and organize it. And now, see, this is the problem with AI. This camera. Sorry, Dina. Okay. And now we get to Rambam. And Rambam says, yes.
So in the Babylon, they had access to the Jerusalem Talmud that was written.
That's a really, really good question. They knew about we know that the Babylonian Talmud quotes the Israeli, let's call them the Israeli rabbis. They quote each other all the time. But there's a moment, it's a transition. It doesn't happen in one moment, but there's a sudden transition that happens between thinking that like, for instance, I'm sorry, if you look at a Gemara, right? You know this. If you look at a Gemara, if you see the name Rebbe, like Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan, right? What do you know right off the bat? Where did they live? Eretz Yisrael. Okay. If you see Rav Huna, what? Rav Chisda, Rava, Shmuel, who doesn't even have a Rav in front of him. There's no title. What do you know right off the bat? Where are they? In Babylonia. Why? Because you could only get smicha in Eretz Yisrael. You couldn't get smicha in Babylonia. So even though most of the diaspora, most of the scholarly world was functioning and blossoming in Babylonia, Eretz Yisrael still held supremacy. At a certain point, there's a transition where the Babylonian rabbis start to talk about how they are better. Babylonia is better. If you want to trust a rabbi, you really should be trusting a rabbi from Babylonia. They're more learned. And you start to see that they're recognizing the fact that the quality of learning is going down in Eretz Israel. So there's this tension. That is why, as we get later in the Gemara, Babylonian conclusions are considered to have to take precedence over what's coming out of Israel. So there's this scholarly tension.
Say that the Babylonian Talmud is based on the Jerusalem Talmud?
They're in conversation with each other for sure.
Like
it just-
come from
yeah.
Yerushalayim, and they go to the valley, say, we think this. Like,
Yes,
right?
they travel back and forth. They travel back and forth until there's just really nothing else the shift is too solidly in the Babylonian favor. Yes.
Are there any communities, have you tracked it historically, that continue to use or prefer to use the Jerusalem Talmud?
Yes.
rather than switching
Yes,
to the
absolutely.
Talmud?
Absolutely. There are communities that favor it. I believe like the communities in Italy favored the Jerusalem Talmud. Overall, most communities ended up going with the Babylonian Talmud. Now, when we talk about Rambam, it's a really good segue that you said, Hillary, because when we talk about Rambam, we're really talking about oh, hold on a second. I have to plug this in. When we talk about Rambam, he really bases his code on the Babylonian Talmud. And it's not even clear that he knew that he had a manuscript of the Yerushalmi.
It's interesting that you mention Italy, because that was a country that some of the very first Jews
Yes, went
went
to.
to.
Exactly. Exactly.
Their tradition. And of course, we didn't have WhatsApp and email then, so they would have been much
Absolutely.
less aware
Of the Babylonian. Exactly. That's a really good point, because most Jews who ended up going to Italy, of course, were ones who were expelled by the Romans. And so they were very in touch with, they were Eretz Israel. They had that strong connection. But I don't want to muddy the waters too much. I just wanted to give you a basis for understanding halakha. Okay. After the Babylonian Talmud is edited, we have a period of time called the period of the Gaonim. Gaon means like genius or leader. Sorry. This is like this camera is a smart camera. So if I bend down, it follows me.
Oh.
And then it doesn't ever come back. Okay, there we go. Okay. So it's really dumb. So
It's just gonna like put his head down.
Exactly. So imagine this timeline in your head. You've got the Mishnah, year 200. Then you have the Babylonian Talmud and all the rabbis involved with that going till the 6th century. What happens between the 6th century and Rambam's time, the 12th century? What happens during those 600 years? You have a period of time called the period of the Gaonim. I am sure you've heard of a Gaon before.
Vilna Gaon.
The Vilna, you stumped me. The Vilna Gaon didn't come until the 19th century. So no, but that was good. You're right. Earlier than the Vilna Gaon. Who's the most famous Gaon that we know of? Saadia Gaon. Remember, Saadia Weissman is named after Saadia Gaon. So Saadia Gaon is the most well-known Gaon, but there were plenty of Gaons. There was Chai Gaon. There were other Gaons floating around. This is basically a period of time from the editing of the Babylonian Talmud. So from the 6th century until the 10th century, you had these Gaonim. And at first they're amazing and they're great. But anybody who took my Golden Age of Spain class knows that most of the Gaonim were born and raised and bred where? In what we would call Babylonia, which is Baghdad and the Iran, Iraq area. Okay. And they hold supremacy when it comes to halakha. They are the ones really making the halakhic decisions and writing the preeminent halakhic works for all of that time, from the time of the end of the Talmud until we get to Rambam. One thing I was just going to say, what's interesting about Saadia Gaon, he was neither born nor raised in that area. He's from Egypt. Okay, so the one Gaon that you know about actually really was an outsider. And the fact that he became the Gaon was the first time that someone outside of that Babylonia area was given the title of Gaon. And that was because they were so desperate. They had no one left. They also were, at that point, they were a community on the decline, not because of Romans or because of Greeks or anything like that. It was just in general, there was a huge deterioration of the social cultural life in that area, both for Muslims, both for Jews, both for everybody who was living there. And so the Jews also suffered from that, not because of persecution. It's the one time I can say it didn't have to do with persecution. It just had to do with world events. And so things start to shift for the Jews. And where does the cradle of halakhic power, where does it shift to? Spain. Okay. And who's in Spain? Maimonides at the end of that whole period. So now on one foot, I've dragged you from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, to the vicissitudes of what happened culturally and politically, until we get to the shift of halakhic power, which really ends up in Spain. Now, I'm not entering into the whole Ashkenazi world, which is where the halakhic powers in northern France and then in Germany. Put that aside. Okay, we're today through Pesach, we're Sephardim.
Okay, that was my question, so.
It's okay.
Good.
That's all anybody wants anyway. Okay, so now, yes.
One of the Kohanim was the head of the yeshivas in Pompadita.
Yes, Pompadita and Sor, they would shift between those two yeshivot. Okay.
But why did Babylonia lose that power, Pompadita?
Because they start once there's general deterioration of life, what do you lose? You lose your funding, right? You lose once you lose the funding, you can't get someone like Saadia Gaon to come and move there anymore because there's no one to support him. And all of a sudden you have this shift, you have these very wealthy Jews in Spain, and they're grabbing all we're about to have the draft, the draft for the NFL. So who are you going to go to if you're a top player? You can go to where the money is, right? Where the support is. Okay. So now we get to Rambam. Okay. And Rambam, basically, he sees all of this. He sees, let's look back on the shelf. Okay. Yes, here we have it. We have Shas right here. Okay. He sees all of this. And then he sees hundreds of years of Gaonic responses to all of that. And where we see beauty and debate and the beautiful world of halakha. He's a philosopher. He's a logician. He wants to be spending his time doing important thought experiences. And what does he see? He sees a mess. Okay. He sees a mess. Not only that, but he also sees the degradation of Jewish communities. He witnessed it himself. He had to run away from Cordoba to northern Spain. Then he had to go from northern Spain to North Africa. Then from North Africa to, the eastern part of North Africa and to Eretz Yisrael. He himself experienced the fact that there was no center of halakhic power anymore. Spain is also deteriorating, and they're holding on for what they can in northern and in Egypt, but they're also deteriorating. And he doesn't know much about what's going on in the Ashkenazi world, but he imagines it must be a mess also. And he says, we have to clean this mess up. Okay, so from there, from these 6 seders, these 6 major volumes that are the bread and butter of the halakhic the industrial complex, okay, the organizational complex, Rambam blows it up. Okay, hold on a second. Rambam blows it up. And now what do you have? Instead of these 6 major volumes and then 68 sub-volumes, he organizes it all into 14, I should have known that, 14 volumes, okay? 14 volumes, and they don't map out onto what I showed you here. So for instance, for all intents and purposes, the first volume of all of Shas, all of this halakha, the first volume is called Brachot, okay? Blessings, spirituality. His first volume is called Mada. It's called Sefer Hamada, the book of knowledge. Okay? We don't get anything about tefillah and blessings or anything until his second volume, which is called Ava. It's called love. And that's where we get the kinds of things you would find in that first volume of Shas. So he blows it up. Whereas Shas goes in an order that makes sense for Eretz Yisrael and for temple times, because it has to do with agriculture, which is very relevant for Eretz Yisrael. It has to do with korbanot, which was very relevant for the temple times. It has to do with maser and tithes and things that have to do with the calendar and the way the calendar worked in Eretz Yisrael. He goes by life. He goes by life in terms of what he thinks are the most important aspects of life. And he says, if you're going to talk about halakha, if you're going to talk about law, well, if I'm coming into this classroom and I have no idea I don't know what your background is. I don't know what your background is. So I'm going to start everybody in the same background. First thing you start with, in his mind, is you start with knowledge. Let's start with the ABCs. What is the foundations of the Torah? What are ethical ideas of the Torah? Why is Torah study so important? Why are we so against idolatry? And finally, how do we do tshuva? How do we do repentance? And we spoke about that last week. There is no tshuva in these books. There's no order to the idea of repentance and tshuva anywhere in the Talmud. There's references to it, but no reference to a process. Rambam makes it a whole book. He makes it a whole book because that's where he sees the importance of halakha. So he takes this whole system and he blows it up into a whole new organizational complex system. Okay, no one has ever done that before, and no one has done it since. The halakhic code that I think I mentioned this last week, the halakhic code that most of us are products of is the Shulchan Aruch that's going to come a couple of centuries later than Rambam. And if you look in the Mishnah Torah, if you look on the first page of the Mishnah Torah, like the title page, okay, this is my Bravender's copy, and at some point I just lost the cover. But if you look at the first page, every edition of the Mishnah Torah comes with commentary. So this is the Mishnah Torah, and there's commentary all along, okay? What's interesting is that the commentary that gets pride of place in the Mishnah Torah is called the Kesef Mishnah. If we look on the title page, the Kesef Mishnah is attributed to who? Hagaon, not really a Gaon, but Hagaon Morenu Yosef Karo. Who's Yosef Karo? He's the author of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the halakhic code that everything we do today is based on. Well, imagine him as a young man reading the Mishnah Torah. He's writing his commentary on the Mishnah Torah. He's taking notes for how he's going to do his halakhic code. And so this is the halakhic code, even though we don't use it as much today, rabbis don't use it as much today as making halakhic decisions, but it's the code to end all codes, because he breaks the organizational, the shackles of the organizational complexity of the Gemara and the Mishnah and the Gemara. He breaks it apart and creates entirely new categories. And I can't emphasize this enough. We've never seen anything like this before. And that's why I went through this whole thing, so you can understand. People get this in the mail, from their mail order. They get this and they're like, they don't know what to make of it. How is this a halakhic code? How do you not start with brachot? How do you not go in the order of the Gemara? Everything that's been done up until now goes in a specific order. It's like writing, let me just give another example. It's like writing a commentary to the Torah and starting with Isaiah, not starting with Genesis. How do you do that? You have to go in the order of the story. And so for rabbis and for scholars who get this, they're like, what is this? And it would be a little bit, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you could come up with examples, all of a sudden you get, some sort of, progressive feminist commentary on something. And you're like, I don't recognize this. I don't even know what the words are. This doesn't sound like anything that I've read before. And it throws you, it throws you off kilter. You don't know what to make of it. That's ki'ilu what happened here. Nothing like this existed before. So I hope that I explained it as dramatically enough as possible. And I had to take you on a very long journey to do that. But I think it's worth it because I think that it's worth it when you start to study something like this, that you understand why it's so, why we're studying it to begin with. Okay. Okay. So now just checking the time. Yes, we have some time to start. And now let's say you're Rambam. Okay. And you want to start. You want to actually start writing this thing. Okay. And so, by the way, this is only one volume. This is 2 volumes that I have at home. And if you look up here, on the top on the right, you can see more. Afterwards, I can give you a tour. For some reason, they don't have the first volume anywhere here. That's why we don't have them down here. But this is just one volume with very, very small writing. So it is quite long, but it's still a lot shorter than this. So if we start, just again, if we look at the title page, the first thing you see is Mishnah Torah, and it says underneath, Hu Hayad Chazaka, Hu Hayad HaChazaka. Okay? And you can kind of scratch your head and say, so what is it? Is it Mishnah Torah or is it Hayad HaChazaka? What is it? What's the title? So what's the difference between those 2 titles?
Mishnah Torah and Yad HaChazaka.
Yeah. Why usually a book has one title, right? Like Torah, right? We just call it Torah. Sometimes we call it Chumash or Chamisha Chumshei Torah, but it's the Torah. So why does this book have 2 titles? Why does the title page say Mishnah Torah and then it says Hayad HaChazaka? You have that too, right?
It's kind of explanation.
So how is it an explanation?
You thought it was 14.
Right. Okay. So Mishnah Torah, we're going to see, is a very controversial name. What does Mishnah Torah? First of all, who called it Mishnah Torah? Rambam. Okay, we're going to see. He called it Mishnah Torah. Now, there was a famous 17th century, I think it was. I can't remember his real name, but he's called the Shlah. Okay, there's a rabbi who came many, many centuries later. He's called the Shlah. His Roshei Tevot, his abbreviation is Shin Lamed Hey. Do you know why people call him the Shlah? Yes. Why do they call him Shlah, the holy Shlah?
Kati,
Yes.
Kati,
Yes.
the hay is for Horowitz,
Yes, right. That's right.
but I can't remember what the Shin and the Lamed are for. But I know that
But
the hay is Horowitz.
So the hay is actually part of his sefer. He also his name was Horovitch. I think it was like Yitzchak Horovitch or something like that. He called his commentary on the Torah Shnei Luchot Habrit, the 2 tablets. So people didn't take too nicely to, like, can you imagine if I called this class, the truth, people do call it, the true Torah. I mean, people use those names.
It's my ancestry.
Right.
This Shlah Kadosh is.
Was your ancestor?
It fits.
It fits totally. So no one calls him the Shnei Luchot Habrit. They all call him the Shlah, which doesn't sound as good as Shnei Luchot Habrit. But people thought, what a chutzpah. It's a good commentary, but don't call it the tablets of the law. What did Rambam call his code of law? Mishnah Torah. What does Mishnah Torah mean? Second to the Torah. Second to the Torah. And he's going to tell you exactly why he calls it second to the Torah. So people, first of all, imagine you're sitting in northern France, okay? You don't know who this Rambam guy is, but you get a copy of this and you can read it. Why can you read it? Because it's in Hebrew, it's not in Arabic. So you get a copy of this and you're like, what is this? Why are you starting with the book of knowledge and the book of love? This sounds, very 1970s hippie, whatever. What is this? And then you see that this author has called it Mishnah Torah, second to the Torah. Okay. So after they burned it and did other things and it still survived, people still felt uncomfortable. Even when they used it as a halakhic code, they still felt uncomfortable using a book called the Mishnah Torah. So they called it the Yad HaChazakah, the strong arm. Why? Because Yud Daled Yad in Gematria equals 14. And guess what? If you look at the sheet I sent you, how many volumes of this are there? 14. Okay, so that's how if you're frum and you're in yeshiva, you don't call it Mishnah Torah, you call it Yad HaChazakah. Okay, so now Rambam, yes,
or in Hebrew?
he wrote this in Hebrew. It's the only book he wrote in Hebrew.
In Hebrew. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's why when we look at it, when I teach more Nevuchim or commentary on the Mishnah of Rambam, just do it in English. He wrote it in Arabic. We're not reading the original in any case, but here, he wrote it in Hebrew. And for those of you who've been in the Golden Age of Spain class, you know how difficult that is. To write about halakha, that's easy in Hebrew, right? Hebrew, Aramaic, you can do it both. But to write about philosophy and love and knowledge and science in Hebrew, there wasn't any vocabulary. He basically had to create a vocabulary for it. Yeah. So really remarkable. Okay. So if you have
how did people understand? Like they understood Hebrew, but there were new words.
Yeah, well, he didn't really come up with new words. He used old words, but they came up with he had new meanings. So he understood that people were going to read it on different levels. Someone was going to read it on one level, and other people were going to be able to get his meaning on another level. But it's a good question, like who was really able to tap into all the meaning in Mishnah Torah? That's what we're going to
like guessing.
So not completely,
commentary.
because if you're an Arabic speaker and you're immersed in philosophy, then even though you know those words in Arabic, you can kind of get the idea of what he's trying to say in Hebrew. So that's, so people who translated, by the way, the people who translated his Guide to the Perplexed, they had to use some of those same words. They took words from Mishnah Torah and put it into the translation. So, okay. So for those of you who have a sefer with you, there's a hakdama. There's an introduction. Okay. In the actual Mishnah Torah, this is not a hakdama. This is not an introduction. Introductions, by the way, were a recent phenomenon. The Muslims introduced the idea of a hakdama. You do not find any hakdama in Jewish literature before, let's say, the 10th century, 11th century, something like that. I think even Vacha Ibn Bakuda might have been the first one to have a hakdama, but I can't say that for sure. So you think, oh, Rambam, he's just being cool and Sephardic, but no, he actually didn't write this as a hakdama. He meant this to be part of the Mishnah Torah. He didn't write a hakdama, but then later publishers called it a hakdama. So if you have your actual Mishnah Torah, you will see. And so I encourage you, if you have a Mishnah Torah at home, bring it with you because it's kind of good. You can take two things out of the class. You can always go with the source sheet, but it's kind of nice to learn how to use the Mishnah Torah. So if you just open it up to the what they call the introduction, you see that it says, "Az lo evosh behebiti el kol mitzvotecha." Okay, it was very common, and it's still very common, that when someone is writing a book of halakha or a commentary on the Torah, they will kind of, it's like a to Toby with love, but like sometimes, how people even today when they write novels, they'll put like a quotation, and you're supposed to, you have no idea what it means. So he did the same thing. He put a pasuk. what is this pasuk and why did he put it here? As lo avosh ba'abiti el kol mitzvotecha. I will not be ashamed when I regard all your commandments. This is from Tehillim. I will not be ashamed when I regard all your commandments. Now think you're Rambam. You're holding the philosophy, you're holding the science, you're holding halakha. You know that the world, in many respects, is against you, right? You know that you're a controversial figure. Why would he choose this verse to start what he considered to be his magnum opus? He considered this book to be his magnum opus, not his philosophy books. He thought this was his magnum opus. Why would he start with this?
Starting from the most humble place.
Starting from what?
The most humble place.
So there could be some humility here, right?
Is he saying there's equal importance to all of it?
Is he what?
Is he saying there's equal importance to all of it?
So equal importance to all of it. Okay, interesting. Interesting, because he says, it's saying, when I regard all your commandments, I think, Vivian, you're onto something. Definitely, Adele, I think you're right. There's a part of him that's saying, I'm coming, this is a huge project, and I have to come with some humility. But I think, Vivian, you're on the right track when you say, it's all important, meaning that he picks the verse that says, all your commandments. And last week I spoke about scope. And I spoke about how the Mishnah Torah broke new ground in terms of organization, in terms of, we had our categories from last week. Scope was one of them, form. There was another one I can't remember. But the point being, he saw this book as complete.
Yeah.
All your commandments. I didn't leave any of them out, and therefore I'm not going to be embarrassed. I'm not going to be ashamed because I didn't leave anything out. So in many ways, it's lacking humility.
Yeah.
And it's also saying, I know what I'm doing here, guys. You may think I'm crazy and I've broken I've broken everything, but really, if you go with me on this journey, you will see I have nothing to be ashamed about. I have looked, this is the complete halakha, and that's why I call it Mishnah Torah. Nothing is missing.
Is it
Nothing is missing.
criticism maybe even from the old period where they may have missed part of it? Because
Absolutely. And he will talk about it. Elizabeth, that's a great comment. There's an implicit criticism of what came before him. And he does not mince words in this Hakdama about where his criticism comes from. Okay. You see, it's going to be a fun class. We're never going to get through the first source sheet. But you know what? This is the you want to do it carefully. So I do want to get through the Hakdama though today. We have 5 minutes left. I'm going to take 5 more minutes. And if you look at this at home, okay, in your spare time, you will see that the beginning of the Hakdama, he does something that no rabbi has done before him. Okay, everything that I say about Rambam, I'm going to say nobody before him has done this because it was true. What does he do? Anybody who's taken any class with me knows, what do rabbis hate most? What do rabbis hate most? Histories. They hate histories. That's why the first Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, is so interesting, because it's the only time when the rabbis give what we think of as a history. And what is their history? Their history is all cockamamie, right? Like in their history, Moshe and Yoshua, and everything's compressed. Everybody's kind of living at the same time, and there's no like sense of years. And if you look at the Talmud, every bad king is called, now I'm forgetting his name. What was the name of the bad Jewish king that they? No, Rachel will know. And I put you on the spot. What?
Balaam.
Bilam, no, not that. But there's a later Jewish king, and every bad Jewish king is called by that name. Doesn't matter when they lived, Or Titus. Titus is like the bad emperor and the bad general. Every bad emperor is called Titus, because the rabbis, they don't care about history. Okay, it's not of interest to them. They feel like they're tapping into something much more eternal. I don't know. That's maybe a reason why they don't get involved in history. Here we have an immense number of words that Rambam dedicates to history. Okay, it's going to be the first time he delves into history. We're also going to learn the second time. Okay, he does it a few places, but really, this is a man who does not waste words, and yet pages are put into this history. And what is the history? It's a history of halakha. Okay, he gives a very detailed history from the time of the giving of the Torah. From Moshe, it's like that first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, but pages long, where he goes through every single person. So Moshe gave it to Yoshua, and Yoshua gave it to, the prophets, and the prophets gave it to the judges, or the judges gave it to the prophets, but he names each one of them. And where does he end in the history?
Him.
He does.
I remember
But before,
the quote, like
yes.
Moshe, right?
Before he gets to him, who does he end with? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Who was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? He's the one who edited, right? He's the one who edited the Mishnah in the year 200. Okay. And he talks about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. All right. He gives a lot of time talking to how great Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was. And what does he say? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was faced with an emergency situation. What does he call that? Emergency situations? Shat HaChak, a time of emergency. Okay, we're living in Shat HaChak now. Shat HaChak is a time. It's a halakhic designation. It means throw everything away and do what you can to save your life. Like that's like crisis. We're in crisis. Shat HaChak means crisis. He says Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had the fortitude to see that there was a crisis situation, and that if he didn't act, and if he didn't utilize the technology that was available to him, mainly pen and paper, then this was not going to last. This entire Jewish project was going to implode. And so he had that force, he had that understanding to understand that this was something that he had to do. Who comes next in the history? He goes from the history of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He goes through all the Amoraim, who are the Talmud rabbis, and then he goes through all the Gaonim. And who does he end with? Himself. Okay, so he starts with Moshe. Next is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and next is Rambam. And why is Rambam next? Not just because he's a great guy. Let's start with the source that I gave you, and I'm going to print it out for next week also. ובזמן הזה, תקפו צרות יתרות ודחקה שעה. Okay? It's that crisis situation again. Everywhere we look, we have tsuris. He didn't say tsuris, but everywhere we look, we have tzarot. Everywhere we look, things are falling apart. And so what is this situation in his mind? We're in crisis mode. ועבדה חוכמת חוכמנו בינה נבנותינו נסתתרה. The knowledge of our sages, the wisdom. Now, when he said wisdom, what do you think he means? He doesn't mean just halakha. He means what? Philosophy. Thank you. He means philosophy, and baked into philosophy is what else? Science. Okay, so we're going to build up our lexicon of Maimonidean words. Okay, and our first one is chokhmah. When Rambam says chokhmah, he means not just halakha. He doesn't really mean halakha. He means philosophy and science. Okay, that's what he means. That's not what we mean when we say chokhmah. That's just what he means when he says chokhmah. And obviously just the science and philosophy he knew in his day, right? So it doesn't include ours. He says, we're losing that. So Jews are losing that. Jews are losing our access to that. And what's happened? Nistatra, it's become hidden. What does it mean it's become hidden? It means, first of all, this is his first major critique of the entire Gaonim period of 500 years, because they were writing about this. So what was the problem? They didn't write about philosophy. They didn't write about science. It was hidden from them. Why was it hidden from them? Because they didn't have the nivona, they didn't have the binah, they didn't have the understanding to know anything beyond their little world of halakha. And so because they only can write about halakha, they're missing this major piece of knowledge, and therefore their halakha is correct. It's hidden from them. Okay, so this is his first major attack on everybody who comes before him, of all those Geonim. Then he says, imagine if you're one of the Geonim and you're reading this, and then he says, only a select few comprehend these matters in the proper way. Ooh, you think that, see, if you were just reading this on your own, you'd be like, okay, whatever. That's major criticism. Only a few understand, meaning everybody who came before me and everybody who's alive now with me, most of them don't understand. And another word that we're going to see over and over again in Rambam, and I highlighted it in the source, is inyanim, inyan. When we use the word inyan, what do we mean? We mean like issue, a matter, an issue. When Rambam uses that word inyan, and Rachel, to answer your question, he takes this from the Arabic, the medieval Arabic word for inyan. I don't remember what it is, but that word in a philosophical sense means a philosophical issue, a scientific matter. So not just a day-to-day matter, not just like, I didn't pay my electricity bill. Oh, it's an inyan, that's going to be an issue. No, he means inyan nehen. He means the actual ideas, philosophical, scientific ideas of his time. And then I just want to end with this last part. This is the second paragraph. Na'arti chatzmi, ani Moshe berabi Maimon hasfaradi. Therefore, I see everything that's going on, and I've girded my loins. Why does he have to gird his loins? Why does he have to take a sword and be prepared? Because he knows what kind of controversy he's causing. Mm-hmm. And he knows that he's putting himself in great danger, in intellectual danger, by doing this. And he says, no, but I'm going to do it. And like he said in the beginning, I'm not going to be embarrassed by it. And how does he identify himself? Hasfaradi. He does not say Gaon. He does not say from Bavel. He does not say from Egypt. He does not say from Morocco. Going back to where he left when he was 20. That's who he is. That's the tradition he's coming from. And that's the tradition he's not going to be embarrassed about, even though he spent his entire life outside of Spain. Okay, let's just end with this one thing so we can move on next week. If you look at the last paragraph that I highlighted, Lefichach parati shem chibur zeh Mishnah Torah. Therefore, I called this Mishnah Torah. Lefi she'adam koreh Torah sh'tav tchila, because a person should first read the Torah, and then you can read this. It's amazing. Wow, what's that? But listen, Ve'odeh mimenu Torah sheba'al peh kula, and you will know all of the oral law. You will know all of halakha from this.
So you just need the Bible? You
can save so much space on these shelves. All you need is the Chumash, and he doesn't say Chumash and Rashi. He didn't even know who Rashi was. He just says you need the Torah, no commentary on the Torah, and you need this. Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Do you know what that means? That means you don't need Shas, you don't need Gemara. I've just made your life so easy.
You also don't need Miranda Bouquet.
Right, you don't. Well, he hadn't written it yet, but you don't, and he doesn't say you don't need a comment. But it doesn't say you don't need to read his commentary on the Mishnah. He doesn't say you don't need to read anything else. Just these two things. Yes.
How soon after he wrote the Mishnah Torah
was it burned? About 50 years later. 40 years later.
Were they edited and all the rest that you showed me? That showed in the book. When was that all added?
Oh, the Mishnah Torah?
Yeah.
This is, he's writing the introduction. He's already written it all, right? Like in other words, this is all, it's all out there. It's all out there. If you got this book in the mail, you get the whole thing. Okay, so I'm gonna shut this down for now. Thank you, everybody. See you.
Thank you.